How will the New York Mets address their DH position for 2025? I'll break that down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. First and foremost, I want to wish you all a very happy holiday season. I did not mention that, I don't believe, on the last show. Probably should have. Hope you all enjoyed a very Merry Christmas. And if you're celebrating now, very happy Hanukkah as we close out 2024 strong and look ahead to 2025. And speaking of 2025, who's going to DH for the Mets next year? It's something I haven't talked about, I'm realizing, throughout the entire offseason. We've had a lot of focus on first Juan Soto, then Pete Alonso, the starting rotation. We haven't really talked about DH other than my most recent show where I broke down the idea of the Mets signing both Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso. A little bit of a pie-in-the-sky idea, but it is something that's being thrown out there right now. And if they did attack those two corner infield positions with the top guys, Vientos would clearly be the DH. But if they aren't going to sign both of them, and let's just imagine the Mets are going to sign Pete Alonso, or really doesn't matter, Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman, with Vientos slotting into the other spot, you still have a DH position that has to be filled. And as presently constructed, the odds-on favorite to be the opening day DH for the New York Mets is likely Starling Marte. He's still owed $20.75 million for the 2025 season. Not likely any team is going to pick that up. You now have Juan Soto taking his position in right field. So Marte can maybe stay off his feet a little bit. DH, that might preserve him some. And you could hope you get the best possible season out of Marte as you finish off the 4-year contract with him. And hopefully he gives you a little more return on that investment. But that's not necessarily the DH that you want to go into the year with when you have Juan Soto and you're trying to win the World Series. Ideally, you'd want to have at least a complement to Starling Marte, because while he'd be extremely expensive as a short-sided platoon DH where he's just facing primary left-handed pitching, that is what Marte is still great at. He thrives against lefties, and he can hold his own against righties. If you can get a lefty in there that can fill that void, that would go a long way. Now, on the present-day roster, if you're just looking at what the Mets have, they did sign a lefty to a major league contract, Jared Young, who has a little bit of pop in his bat. He really thrived in a short stint in the KBO last year and has really been successful in the minor leagues. He's never had that success at the big league level. His contract also has a couple option years left. So there's every chance that Jared Young is just depth, and I think that's the more likely or the most likely outcome here, where he's going to start the season in Syracuse, although he'll have a chance to potentially win a job. I really could see the Mets going into spring training and having an open competition for those last couple bench spots. Imagining you have Marte slated as the DH. You have one of Tyrone Taylor or Jose Siri on the bench while the other one starts. You got Luis Torrens as your backup catcher. So you'd have two bench spots left. Now, you have Luis Angel Acuna. You have Jared Young, as I just mentioned. You have Brett Beatty. You have Ronnie Mauricio. So you can go into camp with those guys, maybe make a couple more minor league signings, and just see who grabs the spots. And if you need a left-handed bat to complement Marte, you could have Young, you could have Beatty, or Ronnie Mauricio as a switch hitter. So there's some options internally, but none of them are really good options. So if the Mets want to address this position, and they did show some interest in Jock Peterson, who would have been the perfect fit because he is the absolute ideal complement to Starling Marte. It would have been very expensive to have both of those guys on the same roster. But Jock Peterson, for what he did last year, just facing righties, he was like a top 10 hitter in baseball against right-handed pitching. That's how good Jock Peterson was. So I would have loved that signing for the Mets. Didn't happen. Now you look at the other options, and it's pretty slim pickings when you're talking about DHs on the market. JD Martinez, probably the best DH left. Are the Mets really going to revisit that after he struggled so much from, pretty much, the All-Star break on? He really was not the same guy. Daniel Vogelback is the other DH that you're looking on the market right now, and we know the Mets aren't going to revisit that situation. So beyond the DHs, if you're looking at bat-first free agents, again, it's really hard to find anyone. I mean, just for lefty bats, you got Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo, but neither of those guys swung it well last year. When you look at outfielders, you got Alex Verdugo, but he's more predicated on the glove. You have David Peralta, but Peralta is going to be 37, and I mean, he doesn't have much pop. He did have a good season with the Padres, but not really a great fit. There's a lot of right-handed outfielders that wouldn't complement Marte well. So ultimately, if we're talking about a left-handed bat in free agency to platoon with Starling Marte, there's one name that is clearly at the top of the list. It's a familiar face. That's Jesse Winker. Jesse Winker makes a ton of sense for the New York Mets right now. And ultimately, the Mets could just bring back Pete Alonso, bring back Jesse Winker, and roll. I honestly feel like that could be the ideal outcome for this offseason at this point. Is the simplest way to finish off this roster. And Jesse Winker talked about his time with the Mets so glowingly. Assuming he doesn't have a everyday starting job available at a high dollar amount, you would think the Mets could probably match or get close to whatever he's looking at on a one-year deal right now and get Jesse Winker to sign. And I think he would love to come back, run it back with the New York Mets, and he would be your primary DH as the strong side of the platoon, as the lefty facing the right-handed pitching. It really is ideal. He can play a little left. You want to get Nemo off his feet, play a little right when you want to get Soto off his feet, although the same thing could be said about Starling Marte. You can stick him out there as well. One of those guys gets injured, whoever's playing the best can probably fill in. Obviously, we have Jeff McNeil, too, who could slide into the outfield some. So I think the Mets roster has a lot of coverage if they just signed Jesse Winker. If you look at the starting lineup, it's not incredible. It doesn't scream out to you as like, man, that is just a loaded lineup, as it would if they were to sign Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso, as we talked about in the most recent show, or if they would sign some of the names we're going to talk about in the next segment, some of the real top bats on the market. But still, just by returning your lineup that went to the NLCS, plugging in Juan Soto, you're looking at something like Francisco Lindor batting leadoff. Maybe you go Mark Vientos batting second, Soto batting third, Alonso fourth, Nimmo fifth, Winker sixth, Francisco Alvarez seventh, Jeff McNeil eighth, Jose Siri ninth, or Tyrone Taylor. That's a pretty good lineup. It's a pretty good lineup if that's the way you want to structure it all. And then you'd have Marte as well. That would be platooning with Winker. You'd have, Tyrone Taylor on the bench, or Siri, Luis Torrens, and then one of that competition between Young, Acuna, Beatty, Mauricio. One of those guys would get that final bench spot as the utility infielder. So I think that really is the simplest and cleanest fit for the New York Mets to go into next year with all the bats they need to really have a strong lineup and make that a real focal point of their team where they could win a lot of games by scoring a bunch of runs. But they could also aim higher, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment. I'm going to go through some other free agent options that are going to cost a little bit more, but could give you a much more dangerous lineup. Before we get to that, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Does Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that were just killing me. I had no idea. Didn't even realize I was still paying for them. But with Rocket Money, it made me easy to track them all down, cancel the unwanted subscriptions. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has helped over 5 million users save a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so who are some of the top free agent bats the Mets could still target to fortify that DH position? Anthony Santander jumps out if you're just talking about getting pop in that DH spot. Imagine the Mets sign Pete Alonso, they get a 40 home run threat back in their lineup. Anthony Santander just hit 44 home runs. He drove in 102. He's 30 years old. He's a switch hitter. He is the perfect guy to be your everyday DH. You would move Starling Marte in some trade where you probably have to eat a bunch of salary, whatever it is, and then you plug in Santander. This is an extremely expensive series of transactions. That's why it's a little bit unlikely because, again, you'd have to clear Marte, I think. I don't believe you'd want Starling Marte just on your bench as a bench bat. And Santander, you'd want in the lineup every single day. He does play right field, not well, but neither does Juan Soto, so you can kind of flip those guys every once in a while. Get Soto off his feet some, get Santander off his feet a lot probably. And, yeah, it could make a lot of sense. He does have the power. He slugged at a 506 clip. The one thing that's concerning, he only hit for a 235 average, and he got on base at a 308 clip. Now, I'll take it if you want to give me 44 home runs, but if the power dips a little bit and he's not getting on base, some of that value goes away. And if he ultimately is going to get a long-term deal, if he's able to get 4 or 5 years on the market, I'm probably not in on this, but let's just say his market sort of craters. And you can get Anthony Santander on a 2-year deal with an extremely high AAV with an opt-out where you can basically prove it again with another team on a 1-year deal, essentially. And you plug him into your DH spot, and if he ends up opting in, he opts in, and it is what it is. But this would be the way that your lineup is the absolute best. Now, I don't think it's likely. I really don't. But let's just dream for half of a second here. Imagine this is your lineup. You go Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Anthony Santander, Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo as your 1 through 6. That's better than an Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso lineup. It is. Offensively, it's nuts. I mean, you're talking about Lindor and Soto leading off for you, and then you have 3 guys that can hit 40 bombs for you, and Alonso, Santander, and Vientos. You can line those guys up however you really want to. So if Lindor and Soto both get on, you get 3 cracks at a 3-run homer. To me, that is just insane. Now, the problem is he has a qualifying offer attached to him, so you have to get draft picks. The fact that he doesn't have a position is not great, especially if you are signing Pete Alonso as well, because ideally you'd want to maybe have that DH spot potentially open because you never know when Alonso might need to move to DH or even Juan Soto might need to move to DH. If Santander gets 5 years, I just don't think you can do it. But again, if it is a shorter term deal with a high average annual value, and you could bring him in and it's Steve Cohen's money, he just doesn't care, that's a loaded lineup. Similar build, you have Teoscar Hernandez. Now, the difference is Teoscar Hernandez is not a switch hitter. He's right-handed. The Mets are already pretty righty-heavy, especially if they bring Pete back. So you are running into that if that is an issue. But Teoscar Hernandez hit 272 this past year, got on base at a 339 clip, slugged at a 501 clip, 33 home runs, 99 RBIs. I think he's probably a slightly better all-around hitter than Anthony Santander. He strikes out a lot more, but hits for a higher average, gets on base, a little bit of a higher clip. The slug was very close to one another. He didn't hit 44 home runs, but he had 33 homers and a lot of doubles. Teoscar Hernandez would be a nice fit. I ultimately don't think the Mets go there. Again, you had the qualifying offer attached, and I believe there's got to be a team out there that could use Teoscar Hernandez in the outfield. The Mets don't have an outfield spot left. They're not going to put Teoscar Hernandez in left and slide Nimmo into center field, although offensively that would be an absolutely disgusting team. But I still don't think it's likely. Here's the one that I could actually see working out for the New York Mets. Jurickson Profar is a free agent. Now, I have been very wary of the idea of the Mets, or really any team outside of the Padres, signing Profar. And I feel like that's not giving Jurickson Profar enough credit. So I dove into the numbers. And yes, the reality is Jurickson Profar has had 2 good seasons, really, in his career. 2022 with the Padres, 2024 with the Padres. Something about Profar in a Padres uniform just works. But he is coming off an all-star season. He turns 32 years old in February, just won a Silver Slugger. He's a switch hitter that hit 280, got on base at a 380 clip, slugged at a 459 clip, 24 home runs, 85 RBIs. He wasn't great defensively in left field, but he could be your DH. And if you want to, you can stick him out there when you need to get Nimmo off his feet or if Nimmo's hurt. But Jurickson Profar could be your DH. I think you could probably sign him to a 3-year deal. And he would make your lineup a lot better. I'd be obviously just concerned about the idea of a longer-term deal with Jurickson Profar. Who knows? Maybe the market doesn't develop for him. Maybe you can give Jurickson Profar a 1-year contract that's more significant than any other team out there, and he just opts to sign for that 1-year deal and bet on himself again because he's not getting the 3-year deal in free agency. And Profar, after this season, should be trying to get the multi-year contract. I think that's why his market is so quiet, because teams are probably hesitant to give it to him. But you look at what he did this past year, and you're talking about a guy that has figured out how to leverage his power in a way that he hadn't previously. It's because he's hitting the ball harder than he ever has before. Jurickson Profar has never had an average exit velocity over 90 miles per hour. I believe he actually hasn't ever had an average exit velocity over like 88.6 miles per hour. But this past year, his average exit velocity was 91.1 miles per hour. So he was hitting the ball harder than most hitters in the league. He was in the 80th percentile, the top 20% of the league when it came to average exit velocity. And this is a guy that throughout his career has never been a high strikeout guy. And he's always been a pretty high walk guy. The past year, he had a walk rate of 11.4% and a strikeout rate of 15.1%. So he's always been a good at bat, but now he's a good at bat who can do damage for you, who can hit over 280, who can get on base at a 380 clip, who was able to pop 24 homers. Jurickson Profar is not the name that I ever really thought would jump out as, oh, he should be a Met, but he doesn't have a qualifying offer attached. He's coming off a great season. If you are able to sign him to a 1-year deal, let's just say the market is not there for him. And the best he's got is like 3 years, $40 million to go back to the Padres. He might just take that. He might take a below market deal to go back to the team that he's a leader of, that he fits in like a glove. Or maybe he gets this offer in early February from the New York Mets, who were about to go into camp with Starling Marte as their DH. And they say, man, Profar's still out there. What if we float $25 million in front of them just because Steve Cohen doesn't care? And you can sign him to a 1-year deal. And maybe it's like the Teoscar Hernandez deal with the Dodgers last year, where it's got a bunch of deferrals and a change of the luxury tax and all that crazy stuff. But ultimately, Jurickson Profar is getting a ton of money to play for the Mets for 1 season, to bet on himself, to prove that the changes he made last year in San Diego, it wasn't just a Profar's magical in San Diego thing. He can go into the biggest market and do it. And if he does, hits the market at 32, set to go into his age 33 season with a chance to maybe still get a pretty nice 3-year deal, I would just put Jurickson Profar in the back of your mind. I don't think it's likely. I think Jesse Winker is the far more likely fit where you just re-sign Pete, sign Winker, roll with that. But if the Mets are patient, Jurickson Profar could fall into their lap a similar way as what JD Martinez did last year, and you'd be getting a younger player coming off a career year that could really help you as a switch hitter in that DH spot. And if it's Profar, I don't even think you necessarily have to get rid of Starling Marte, because you could have Marte as sort of a hedge if Profar doesn't work out. He could just be an expensive bat off your bench. I'd be very curious if the Mets could pull that one off. Again, short term for me is the only way that I could see the Mets doing it, maybe 2 years at most. But a guy that is coming off a good season that could have a pretty big impact. So figure that might be a more realistic target than Anthony Santander or Teoscar Hernandez. It's going to require draft picks and international bonus pool money going back the other way because they got qualifying offers attached. And those guys probably deserve 3 or more years, at least you would think, at maybe a higher average annual value than what Jurickson Profar might get. And Profar had a season that wasn't quite there with those guys when it came to power numbers, But I mean, you can even make an argument just based on WAR total and impact to his team that Jurickson Profar was every bit as valuable as both those guys this past season. And it's just the lack of track record in his career that makes him a free agent that teams are not going to be in on to the same degree as they might be a Teoscar Hernandez or an Anthony Santander. But there's also the trade market. And I've identified a couple of candidates the Mets could target there that would fill this need for a left-handed bat. We'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel Sportsbook app has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players are going to score a touchdown each week. It's always a safe place to look. Maybe you find the guy that always scores. Throw your $5 bet on that maybe to win that $250 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can also bet on how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. You can look at the NBA games as well as the NFL action. And you can also even look beyond that. You can look maybe even ahead to MLB futures if you want to. See what the Mets World Series odds are right now. But if you want to join today, just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so I got some trade candidates here that might fill the need for the New York Mets. And the first one is not an ideal fit based on the contract, but just based on the player, it actually would be a perfect fit. And that's Masataka Yoshida. He's 31 years old, does not have a real position. You could stick him in the outfield, but really, he's a hitter, and he's a pretty good one. Versus right-handed pitching this past year, Yoshida hit .310, .374 on base, .458 slug, had an .832 OPS, a .134 WRC plus. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus that measures hitters on a league average of 100. So if a player has a 101 WRC plus, he's 1 point better than your league average hitter. A 134 WRC plus is 34 points better than your league average hitter. Anything over 115 is good. Anything beyond 125 is verging on really good to great. Anything over 130 really is that. So 134 WRC plus, he's a very effective hitter against right-handed pitching. So he would make the perfect platoon partner with Starling Marte. Here's the few caveats to that. For one, not a ton of power. 25 home runs in his career and about 1,000 plate appearances up to this point. Had 15 home runs and 590 plate appearances as a rookie. Last year, his second season stateside, got just about 420 plate appearances, had 10 home runs. So if you expect him in that part-time DH role, he probably would get something close to 450 plate appearances. You might only get 10 bombs, and I don't know if Starling Marte is going to hit 10 home runs in the other half of that platoon against left-handed pitching. So it's not a lot of power for a very expensive DH platoon. Masataka Yoshida signed a 5-year, $90 million deal with the Red Sox. So an average of $18 million per season, but that contract a little bit backloaded. So he makes $18.6 million over the next 3 years, tied to this DH. There's a reason that the Red Sox have been shopping him and haven't found him a home, and it's because of that contract. If he hit the open market, he'd have no problem finding a deal from somebody. In fact, he might enjoy a pretty healthy market, just not at the rate that he got paid. So if the Red Sox kicked in some money, maybe this would make some sense. Again, though, combine his money with Starling Marte. If there's no money coming over in the deal, you're talking about nearly $40 million on a DH platoon that would hit maybe 20 home runs at best. That's not really the best allocation of resources. Now, if they kick in some cash, let's say they eat that down so it's more like $13, $14 million a year instead of 18, 19. Well, now you're talking, right? Now you're looking at a player that can come in, be a huge benefit for your lineup. I think it really would be a good fit with Marte. You would have a high on-base percentage, between those two guys in that platoon. Probably a pretty high batting average. Limited power, but still some sneaky pop at times. And just professional hitters that would, hit the sacrifice fly when you needed them to. Get the base hit with the runner in scoring position in 2 outs. All that stuff that moves the lineup along. Yoshida makes sense because of that. The 3 years and the contract, it probably isn't the ideal fit, but you never know. Here's one that I like a lot, though. How about going out and getting Brandon Lau from the Tampa Bay Rays? Lau is owed $10.5 million in 2025 with a $500,000 buyout on an $11.5 million club option. He has been one of the better second basemen in baseball at times, particularly back in 2021 when he hit 39 home runs from the second base position. Last year, he was a 21 homer guy. And you look at the numbers, they're a little bit subdued to when he was at his peak. But here's one thing that I noted that was very interesting. You look at the splits. He had a sub 700 OPS when he played second base and when he played first base. He had 37 games at DH. And when he DH, Brandon Lau had a 939 OPS. Now, he's got slight reverse split, so he's not necessarily the type of left-handed hitter that you'd want to shield from lefties. But he could still be the guy that DH for you some, play a little bit of second base, play him at first base if you wanted to, move Jeff McNeil around some. He's just a good player. And I think he is on the trade market for the Rays. You're looking at one of his last years of control at a higher dollar amount for what they typically spend. Lau could be a guy that gets shipped off somewhere, and the Mets could be the team that takes a chance on him because there is still that ceiling of 39 home runs when he was at his absolute best. He has a ton of power from the left side, particularly for the second base position. And it's not a contract that you'd feel bad about having on your books. $10.5 million with a buyout if he's bad, it really would make a lot of sense. I don't know what it would take to acquire him, what the Rays would be interested in. But if you can get a deal done there, that might make some sense. Now, here's one that I think is ideal and wouldn't cost much. That's Trevor Larnach. Trevor Larnach just hit arbitration with the Twins. So there's 3 years of control left. He's coming off the best season of his career where he hit 259, 338 on base, 434 slug, 15 home runs, and about 400 plate appearances, 52 RBIs, 121 WRC plus. So he was 21% better than your league average hitter. Hits righties, doesn't hit lefties. This is a trade where you get a guy with 3 years of control that's pretty cheap for the Mets. For the Twins, because he's in arbitration, he's going to start to cost a little bit. And for them, even a little bit is too much. But he's a left-handed bat. You could platoon with Starling Marte. He's a piece that I think would be a quality asset for you moving forward if you decide to move him after the season for whatever reason. If he didn't fit your roster construction, you can stick him in the outfield when you need to. He makes a lot of sense. I don't think he would cost that much. The Twins are floating the idea of moving Royce Lewis to second base, which would leave third base open. Maybe this is a Brett Baty trade. Now, it would be a tough pill to swallow in some respects to move a former top prospect for a guy in Trevor Larnach that, at his best is an 800 OPS guy and probably more like a 750 to 780 OPS guy, but he's a quality big league hitter. Brett Baty is not that. So it would absolutely make your team better. Sure, there's a world Brett Baty finally connects, but we just don't know if that's going to happen. Trevor Larnach has a much higher floor, brings some pop to the table. I think it's not a sexy move, but that could make it a David Stearns move, and that's why I wanted to point that one out. The other option here as far as getting Trevor Larnach, if you didn't want to give up Baty, you just want to sort of absorb Larnach. If you took on some of Christian Vasquez's contract, I think the Twins would happily part with Larnach. Christian Vasquez, so $10 million. They're trying to get that money off their books. He could be your backup catcher, or if you still love Luis Torrens, you could literally eat like $6 million of the contract for the Twins and then cut him if you wanted to, honestly. Make him a free agent. So, again, because of the cost of acquisition, it feels like a David Stearns-esque move, but who knows? The only other one that I even considered was Luis Ariz because he was on the trade market. You can make Luis Ariz your DH. Is going to hit for a high average, but that's pretty much all he does. Doesn't have any slug to his game. Doesn't even really get on base at a great clip when you consider how high he hits for an average because he doesn't walk at all. And he's a horrible defender. but he can hit. He can hit. And if you have a deep lineup, especially when you get to the playoffs, I do think Luis Arraez is the type of playoff player just when it comes to getting hits. Hits are so valuable in October. I can see the Mets kicking the tires on it a little bit. I don't think that Luis Arraez has nearly the trade value that you would expect for guys who won multiple batting titles. But I also think because of that, the Padres shouldn't be in a complete rush to trade him. It was reported that they were shopping him and Jay Cronenworth, so maybe thinking that they can move one of their infielders and be fine with what they still have in house. So it's an option. I just don't know if it is the best option as your DH if you're basically getting a DH that's not going to give you any power, but it's going to hit like 320. So we'll see. Ultimately, the New York Mets could just re-sign Pete Alonso if they want to, and they could just trust the kids. If they want to leave that door open, they signed Jerry Young. They clearly like him. They have Starling Marte. That is sort of your veteran DH platoon that you can roll into the season with, if nothing else. And then you have Beatty and Mauricio and Acuna and Jet Williams on the way and Drew Gilbert also. And if you really have confidence in your prospects and your young players, maybe you just don't address it. Maybe you spend whatever money's left after re-signing Pete or signing Alex Bregman, and you just get some relievers. And that's how you finish off your offseason. I feel like the Mets will probably add 2 more bats, though, just because it's a World Series, mindset now. You're trying to win it all. Not that they weren't last year, but last year the goal was try to make the playoffs, be a playoff team. Now you have higher goals, you have higher aspirations. So I think the Mets are in a position now where they need to, for one, just bring Pete back. I mean, that's the most obvious thing. But once you do that, you have a DH spot that is going to, what is Starling Marte now? 37 years old, if I'm not mistaken, or 36. And he has not been healthy. So if you're relying on Marte to be the guy for you, and he actually just turned 36, so I'm aging him a little bit, but still, if you're expecting him to be the guy for you at DH, you have to be anticipating that you are going to get something from Jared Young and the young players on your roster. You have to be really leaning into that idea of wanting to keep a spot open for those guys, because if not, it's Steve Cohen's New York Mets. Go out and sign somebody, whether that is just Jesse Winker, which I think is the easiest move, whether that's really shopping in the expensive aisle with Anthony Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, or something a little bit shy of that in Jurickson Profar, or if that's trying to find a trade candidate that makes sense. But the Mets are in a position where if they added 2 bats that are really good, you are looking at their lineup and saying, man, 1 through 8, this team's loaded with simply the question mark of center field. Jeff McNeil, where's he going to be at? And Francisco Alvarez. Like that back third of the lineup, there'd be some questions, but you have upside with McNeil and Alvarez where it could be a 1 through 8 dynamic lineup for the New York Mets. We will see what they do. We'll see if Steve Cohen has any Hanukkah presents for the Mets faithful over the next 7 nights. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning into the show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with a local host from each team, league-wide host from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.